Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 on Wednesday the 7th of September. My name is Brian Liddy. Today's Ukraine update, day 561. At least 17 people have been killed, including a child, and another 32 injured after a Russian rocket struck a busy outdoor market in the Ukrainian city of Kostyantynivka, according to Ukrainian officials. Videos of the aftermath of the attack, one of Russia's deadliest strikes in months, showed fires raging in destroyed buildings and soldiers carrying body bags away. The Russian attack came as the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, was in Kyiv for an unannounced two-day visit, his first for a year to the Ukrainian capital. Blinken met his Ukrainian counterpart, Dmytro Kuleba, held discussions with President Volodymyr Zelensky and described progress in the Ukrainian counter-offensive as very, very encouraging. Secretary Blinken had announced new aid for Ukraine, totaling more than $1 billion during his visit, including HIMARS missile launch systems, Javelin anti-tank weapons, Abrams tanks and other weapons systems. The Pentagon said it would also send depleted uranium shells for Abrams tanks, a form of ammunition that is controversial. Romania's President Klaus Iohannis called for an urgent investigation into apparent drone debris discovered on its soil after Russian attacks on neighbouring parts of Ukraine. A Russian occupation-appointed official has acknowledged that Moscow's forces have abandoned the Ukrainian village of Robotny more than a week after Kyiv announced its recapture. The situation along the eastern front line remains difficult, and the main task for Ukraine's troops is to ensure reliable defence and prevent the loss of strongholds, the commander of Ukraine's ground forces has said. The enemy does not abandon his plans to reach the borders region, said Alexander Syrski. Ukraine's parliament voted to approve the appointment of Rustem Umerov as the new defence minister, a lawmaker said. Umerov is a leading member of the Crimean Tatar community who has represented his country in sensitive negotiations with Russia. He is replacing Alexei Reznikov, who stepped down at Zelensky's instigation after 22 months in the job. Vladimir Putin's gangster nuclear threats require NATO to adopt a much more aggressive response, including flying more aircraft with nuclear weapons, the chief of the General Staff of the Polish Armed Forces has said. General Rajmund Andrzejczyk also said he did not think North Korea would be preparing to sell weapons to Russia without the agreement of China. Network Rail admitted in court it was to blame for a series of failures over the crash. Network Rail admits to breaches of the Health and Safety at Work Act at the High Court in Aberdeen over Carmont train crash. Network Rail admitted in court it was to blame for a series of failures over the crash. In the High Court in Aberdeen today, Network Rail acknowledged a series of failures that led to the high-speed train crashing in August 2020 into a landslide, killing 3 people. The derailment, which led to a severe fire, killed Dinny Brett McCulloch, 45, who was the train's driver, and passenger Christopher Suchbury, 62. Suchbury was on the train because his earlier service had been cancelled. The 6 other passengers on the Glasgow-bound service were injured. Network Rail agreed it had failed to impose an emergency speed restriction on the line and failed to warn the driver it was unsafe to drive at 75 miles per hour after severe downpours and flooding led to an earlier landslip on another section of track nearby. During the hearing, Network Rail admitted it had failed to ensure that a drainage system near the track, built by the now defunct contractor Carillion, had been properly constructed. It also failed to have a handover meeting with the contractors at the site to check the drains were built properly. The charge, which was split into 5 parts, described how the drainage system failed, with gravel washing out from the drainage trench and onto the track. The high-speed train, which had 2 engines and 4 carriages, struck the obstruction at 72.8 miles per hour, causing it to derail, decouple and strike a bridge parapet before the lead engine burst into flames. Network Rail also failed to have a proper training and quality assurance system for analysing weather forecasts. That meant it had no emergency meeting on the morning of the 12th of August to discuss the extreme weather affecting its services in Scotland. Alex Prentice, KC, for the prosecution, told the court Network Rail cooperated fully with the investigation and, from the outset, were clear that this case would result in a guilty plea. Court documents outlined that there had been a forecast of extreme rainfall and reports of severe weather, landslips and flooding in Aberdeenshire and the surrounding area on the day of the crash. The Met Office had imposed an amber severe warning weather. The Met Office had imposed an amber severe weather warning on North East Scotland the previous day. Parliament has been provided with an update on reinforced autoclaved aerated concrete, or RAC. Shirley-Anne Somerville reiterated to MSPs that the Scottish Government continues to follow the professional advice on RAC, as it always has done, and is working with local authorities and other partners to understand the extent of the issue. Ministers have been reassured that the current guidance of the Institute of Structural Engineers and risk-based approach remains appropriate. Addressing Parliament, Ms Somerville said, "The Scottish Government and the wider public sector has already done much to understand the extent of RAC issues in Scotland, and we recognise there is more to do. Everyone with the responsibility for building safety takes this matter very seriously." She went on to say, local authorities have a clear responsibility to ensure their schools are safe for pupils, staff and all their users. They are carrying out assessments of all their school buildings. We are aware that some parts of the school estate and some councils still need to complete full surveys. Ministers have been clear to authorities that these must be carried out as a matter of highest priority. Safety is a central consideration, and there is robust guidance which is followed by every local authority to ensure these buildings are safe for the pupils, staff and public to be in. An SNP MP has sharply criticised the UK government after a media minister rejected free access to televised Scotland national team games for fans. Gavin Newlands MP met with UK Government Minister of State for Media and Data, John Whittingdale MP, earlier this week to explore the possibility of placing Scotland national team games under listed events legislation, meaning the broadcast rights to these events would be offered to the main free-to-air terrestrial broadcasters. The Paisley and Renfrewshire North MP left the meeting disappointed and said the Minister's attitude and rejection spoke to the UK Government's disinterest in the success of the Scotland national team and the experience of fans. Mr Newlands and his SNP colleagues have campaigned for years to ensure Scotland fans can enjoy games on terrestrial TV, just as English and Welsh fans can. But with broadcasting law reserved to the UK Government, Tartan Army supporters have been forced to shell out for pay-per-view subscriptions. It comes in the same week that the UK Government plans came to light that would ban bus-travelling Scottish football fans from stopping at pubs prior to attending matches. Commenting, Gavin Newlands MP said, "In what is an incredibly important week for Scottish football, the UK Government has shown they couldn't care less about our game and they hold Scottish football fans in contempt. Scotland supporters are being priced out of watching their national team, whilst English and Welsh fans can watch their sides for free this weekend. I want to see a similar offer for Scotland fans, but it's clear from my meeting with the Minister that the UK Government does not share that desire. We are seeing one of the best Scotland sides in decades, with a game on Friday that could be the most important of Scotland's qualifying campaign, and to inspire the next generation of talent, we should not have to get past a paywall to see it. For years, my SNP colleagues and I have fought to ensure fans can cheer on the Scotland team on their free View TV channels, and we are simply met with a shake of the head from the UK Government. It speaks volumes about their disinterest in the success of our team and the experience of our fans." Former Conservative MP Chris Pincher has said he will quit the House of Commons, triggering a by-election in what was previously considered the safe seat of Tamworth in Staffordshire. Days after he lost an appeal against an 8-week suspension from Parliament for groping 2 men at a private members' club last summer, the former Deputy Chief Whip said he wanted to put an end to his constituents' uncertainty. In a short statement, Pincher said he had made arrangements to resign and leave the Commons. He added, "Tamworth is a wonderful place, but it has an honour to he said, "Tamworth is a wonderful place and it has been an honour to represent its people." The move fires a starting gun on a long-expected third by-election likely to take place this autumn. Rishi Sunak is already facing the headache of trying to defend the seat of Mid-Bedfordshire, which was recently vacated by former Tory MP Nadine Dorries, who had a 24,000 majority. Pincher was nearly 20,000 votes out in front in Tamworth at the last general election, making it one of the safest Tory seats in the country. However, bigger majorities have been overturned in recent by-elections, and nationally, the Conservatives remain about 20 points behind Labour in the opinion polls. A further problem for Conservative campaign headquarters is posed by their choice of candidate for the upcoming Tamworth by-election. Eddie Hughes, the current Conservative MP for Walsall North, which is in effect being abolished under proposed boundary changes, had been selected as the party's Tamworth candidate at the next general election, but has confirmed he won't be standing in the by-election. While no date has yet been set by the Conservatives for the by-election, it is likely to be held on the 19th of October, the same day as Mid-Bedfordshire. Bookmakers have Labour as the favourite. In May's local elections, the Tories lost overall control of Tamworth Borough Council for the first time since 2004, losing 6 seats to Labour. Rishi Sunak has confirmed that the UK is to return to the flagship Horizon Europe Science Research Programme. The Prime Minister said that from Thursday, British scientists can apply once again for grants from the £85 billion programme, a move that will be welcomed with jubilation from the science community in the UK, which was once one of the leading beneficiaries of the fund. The deal was sealed after a call between Sunak and the European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, on Wednesday night. The UK has refused to rejoin the Euratom programme and will instead pursue a domestic fusion energy strategy. The European Commission said the UK would contribute about £2.6 billion on average a year to Horizon and Copernicus, with the UK's contribution due to start from January 2024. Downing Street said this would also provide breathing space to boost the participation of UK researchers in an open call for grants before we start paying into the programme. The science community expressed immense relief the deal was finally over the line. Sir Adrian Smith, President of the Royal Society, described the announcement as fantastic news not just for the UK but for scientists across the EU and for all the people of Europe. In a statement, the European Commission said, "Today's agreement remains fully in line with the EU-UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement, the TCA. The UK will be required to contribute financially to the EU budget and is subject to all the safeguards of the TCA. The agreement will need to be ratified by member states." One diplomat warned that they would scrutinise the deal to ensure there had been no deviation from the original deal. The UK was locked out of the Horizon programme for 3 years after a tit-for-tat row over Northern Ireland Brexit trading arrangements. Responding, the Scottish Government External Affairs Secretary, Angus Robertson, said, "While it's welcome the UK Government has finally listened to the Scottish Government, which has long called for full participation in the Horizon, this announcement simply confirms the folly of Brexit. The impact of 3 years of delays and uncertainty for this sector cannot be repaired overnight. On top of disrupted research and lost job opportunities, the ongoing lack of free movement limits EU researchers' ability to work in Scotland and vice versa. Ministers will be looking closely at the details of the agreement to ensure that Scotland's interests are fully represented. However, the fact remains that the only way to meaningfully reverse the damage of Brexit and restore the benefits Scotland previously enjoyed is for an independent Scotland to rejoin the European Union." Moving up the social ladder in the UK has become harder than at any point in more than half a century for children born into poor households, according to the country's foremost economic think tank. Exposing a striking breakdown in social mobility, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, the IFS, said those growing up in the north of England and the Midlands, as well as those from a minority ethnic background, would find it a lot harder than others to become wealthier than their parents. The IFS said children from poor households were finding it harder than 40 years ago to move into higher income brackets, made worse by years of sluggish growth in average earnings. It found that inheritances were becoming more important in determining lifelong income. It may be harder now than at any point in over half a century to move up if you are born in a position of disadvantage, said David Sturrock, a senior research economist at the IFS. Analysing income data for those born in the 1960s, 70s and 80s, the IFS report, called Intergenerational Mobility in the UK, found parental income had become a much stronger predictor of the earnings people born from the 70s onwards could expect by the age of 28. On top of this, the IFS said the growth of inheritances for the children of wealthy parents was likely to drive a further decline in social mobility for the 1980s generation compared with previous decades. After an explosion in house prices in recent decades, helping parents already on the property ladder to pass on greater wealth to their children, it said inheritances would be twice as big on average for those born in the 1980s as for the 1960s. The findings come as Rishi Sunak comes under pressure from the right of his party to abolish inheritance tax as part of the Conservatives' manifesto for the next general election. The party continues to trail Labour in the polls. Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, has also ruled out Labour imposing a wealth tax if it wins the next election, as the party doubles down on efforts to demonstrate economic competence. The IFS said the challenge of moving up income and wealth brackets was more striking for some people than others. It said there were marked regional differences for earnings mobility, with children born in and around London likelier to earn more than their parents compared with those from big northern English cities, including Manchester, Leeds, Newcastle, Hull and Middlesbrough. Those with parents living in London also stood to inherit about twice as much as those in the North East or Yorkshire and the Humber, reflecting the surge in property values in the capital in recent decades compared with weaker growth elsewhere. A former head of the Mossad intelligence agency has said Israel is imposing a form of apartheid on the Palestinians, joining a growing number of prominent Israelis to compare the occupation of the West Bank to South Africa's defunct system of racial oppression. But Tamir Pardo's views will have added impact because of the high regard for Mossad in Israel and because they come at a time when far-right members of Israel's government are moving to kill off any prospect of an independent Palestinian state. Pardo told the Associated Press that Israel's mechanisms for controlling the Palestinians, from restrictions on movement to placing them under military law while Jewish settlers in the occupied territories are governed by civilian courts, matched the old South Africa. There is an apartheid state here, he said. In a territory where two people are judged under two legal systems, that is an apartheid state. Pardo, aged 70, was appointed to head Mossad in 2011 by Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's prime minister then and now. Netanyahu's Likud party said Pardo should be ashamed of his comments. Successive Israeli governments have fought back against accusations of apartheid by characterising them as anti-Semitic out of concern the charge will fuel a boycott movement or open the way to prosecutions under international laws against apartheid. But such allegations become harder to dismiss when they come from those within the Israeli establishment. Pardo told the AP his views on the system in the West Bank were not extreme, it's a fact. He also warned that what has been described as Israel's forever occupation threatens its existence as a Jewish state. Israel needs to decide what it wants, he said. A country that has no border has no boundaries. Pardo is among the highest-ranking former officials to draw the once taboo parallel with the old South Africa. Israel's former Attorney General, Michael Ben-Yair, said last year that my country has sunk to such political and moral depths that it is now an apartheid regime. The former Speaker of the Israeli Parliament, Avraham Berg, and the renowned Israeli historian Benny Morris are among more than 2,000 Israeli and American public figures who have signed a recent public statement declaring that Palestinians live under a regime of apartheid. Health Secretary Michael Matheson has announced a public inquiry will take place into the conduct of former neurosurgeon Sam El-Jamel. Mr Matheson said that in light of the last week's due diligence review published by NHS Tayside, he has now concluded a public inquiry is needed to get the answers to the questions patients have about the surgeon who worked in Tayside between 1995 and 2013. Individual former patients who have ongoing concerns will also be able to request an independent clinical review of their care and treatment by Mr El-Jamel. Mr Matheson said, "Many former patients still live with the consequences of being treated by Mr El-Jamel and still have many unanswered questions. The report presented last week to the board of NHS Tayside outlines a number of failings that I believe can only be examined thoroughly by a public inquiry. It also brings forward significant information not previously known to the Scottish Government. Given the length of time since the first concerns were raised about Mr El-Jamel, this raises real concerns." He went on to say, "It is now clear that the board's governance obligations were not consistently met in respect of how reviews of concerns about Mr El-Jamel were actioned. I consider that this now means that commissioning a full public inquiry under the terms of the Inquiries Act 2005, with the powers to compel witnesses, is the only route to determine what happened, what contributed to the failures described by NHS Tayside, and what can be done to prevent this happening again. A full public inquiry will not necessarily answer the individual clinical questions of each former patient about their own particular circumstances. For that reason, I do still consider that an individual clinical review of patients' individual cases, where that is what individual patients want, remains necessary. This will allow a person-centred, trauma-informed review of each patient's own clinical case, addressing their individual needs and circumstances and attempting to offer answers in a bespoke and personalised way that an inquiry may not. Further details of the public inquiry and the process for arranging individual clinical care reviews will be announced in due course." Targets for nature recovery could be put into law in line with those for climate change as part of a range of proposals to protect and restore Scotland's natural environment. The Scottish Government is asking for views on its plans and actions to accelerate nature restoration and regeneration. The consultation sets out the key elements of Scotland's overall biodiversity framework, including Scotland's Biodiversity Strategy, published in draft form in December 2022, setting out goals of halting biodiversity loss by 2030 and reversing declines by 2045. The first 5-year delivery plan to implement this strategy, a set of principles to guide the delivery of key commitments to conserve 30% of land for nature by 2030 and expand nature networks across Scotland. Proposals for the upcoming Natural Environment Bill, including the introduction of statutory nature recovery targets, which will be binding on government in the same way that climate change targets require ministers work towards meeting net zero targets, and changes to national parks legislation to strengthen the leadership role of national parks in tackling the climate and biodiversity crises. Biodiversity Minister Lorna Slater said, "We are at a tipping point for nature. It is in decline across the globe, with around 1 million species already facing extinction. In Scotland alone, we have seen a 24% decline in abundance of wildlife since 1990. If we don't take urgent action, nature in Scotland will continue to decline and important species will be lost forever. She went on to say, "This week we have published our programme for government, which recognises that the twin crises of climate change and biodiversity loss are global challenges of unprecedented proportions. Restoring nature will reduce carbon emissions, and tackling the climate crisis is essential if we are to prevent extinctions. We must be both net zero and nature positive. A nature positive Scotland creates great opportunities that will benefit people and communities throughout the country, and particularly in rural areas. We want to work with everyone, with local government, local communities, organisations and environmental experts to protect our precious natural environment for future generations. We are especially keen to hear the views of the stewards of our land and seas, farmers, gamekeepers and fishers who have the knowledge and skills to drive the transformation that is needed." Well, that is it for this evening, but before I go, I just want to remind you that here at Broadcasting Scotland we do depend on the generosity of our supporters. So to everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, we thank you very much. You know that our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 per month, please do consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. Our need to reach our £30,000 target to pay our bills is still pressing. However, the generosity of our supporters has given us a little more time. We have now raised nearly £16,500 and we are able to continue making programmes for the next few weeks. But our need to raise the remaining £13,500 is still really urgent. So good night and thank you for watching.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Lewis McGlynn.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Saoirse Healy.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C. Stewart. Broadcasting Scotland is Scotland's independent broadcaster, providing factual news, reporting on the issues important to the people of Scotland.
We are committed to public service broadcasting, and with your support, we will produce even more programmes.
Provide opportunities for young people interested in media production and broadcasting, and challenge preconceptions of what Scottish media looks like, amplifying Scotland's voice and reflecting its communities.
We can already deliver high-quality live news, and we will create the highest quality programmes for you to enjoy. But we can only do that with your support.
So please subscribe to and share our channel or donate to Broadcasting Scotland via the link in the description. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.